thank you so much to everyone for joining us here today. This is the third in our lab talk lecture series. Today we're going to be talking about a piece of research that I was lucky enough to collaborate with Jessica Batke, who's going to be our first speaker today on, called the Locknet. Jessica is a non-resident fellow at the Global Public Policy Institute and a senior fellow at ChinaFile, where she researches China's internet censorship and its wider effect on the world. She is also a senior associate fellow at the Mercator Institute for China Studies, and she is a senior European fellow for cybersecurity for democracy. She has held a number of roles in the journalism and NGO space, and she also served as a research analyst in the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research from 2009 to 2017. She focused on domestic social issues. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jessica, and thank you so much.
All right, I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see if this system, did it work?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you everybody for coming. I'm just going to get right to it. So I'm here because Laura and I wrote a really big research project that we published last year called Locknet. And it looked at the technical underpinnings of China's online censorship system. And because we were able to collaborate as an area studies expert, Laura's a computer scientist, we were able to bring, I think, a bigger holistic view to this system. So why do we call it, confusing, sorry. Why do we call it the Locknet? When you think about lock, we want you to think about canals and locks, not like lock and key. It's a water lock. And we think of the system as a massive water management system. So just like you have a system of canals and locks that can regulate water flow, that sometimes can get flooded, you should also think about China's online information control system in a similar way. It's multi-stage, it's multi-layer. And it means that if you want to understand it, you can't look at just any one of the little locks. You have to look at the whole system because they're designed to function in parallel with each other. So what are the design goals of the Locknet? First is to censor what people see and say, and thereby shape what they know and believe. And we know from things that interviews that engineers did at the very earliest stages of online censorship in China that information control was a design goal from the very beginning. This wasn't something that got bolted on at the end. And while the perception of end users might change, sometimes people may feel there's more or less censorship, the actual technical capacity to implement censorship has just been a one-way ratchet. It's just been getting more complex and capable over time. And why do they want to censor what people see and say? And it's simply to maintain the power of the current governing regime. So when you think about information control in China online, you want to know that it is a design requirement for domestic internet. Again, did not get bolted on. It's an integral part of the functioning of the internet in China, and it's integrated into every layer of the stack. Now, when we talk about a stack, we mean something a little bit larger than the normal protocol stack. You've probably, know about network level censorship if you're in this room, I assume. So censorship that's done mostly at the border. We're going to talk I'll talk a little bit about that, but I also want to make sure that when we think of this extended stack, internet stack in China, we're also talking about the physical infrastructure. We're talking about the censorship that platforms do at the behest of the government. We're talking about offline consequences, what Laura and I call meat space, since we're all just bags of meat and chemical walking around in this world. And I'm going to go through each one of these now in turn. So first, physical infrastructure. There's a really limited number of ingress and egress points for the internet to get in and out of China. Choke points, and that gives the government a lot of leverage to monitor what goes through those. There's also a limited number of autonomous systems, which are, again, controlled by a limited number of state-affiliated enterprises. So again, the government just has a lot of leverage over the physical space, and it corrals all of that into just a few places, which makes it easier to control. Network level censorship. This is currently conducted by middle boxes that are positioned near the physical border. This is the Great Firewall that you have heard of. It includes IP, DNS, HTTP request, SNI, and some quick filtering. These are all operating at the internet transport application layers. And when a new protocol gets introduced that might enhance privacy or allow people to circumvent the system, Beijing will generally ignore it for a while until it reaches a certain threshold of uptake. And once it gets popular enough, then they have to decide, are we able to filter this selectively, or do we have to block it wholesale? Service level censorship. This is what gets implemented by the companies that host these large online platforms. That can include search engines, social media platforms, forums, LLM chatbots, anything else you can think of. All of these services have to register with the government. They have to abide by content restrictions, and they have to impose those restrictions on any user-generated content. And really interestingly, the government does not provide a single clear list of topics or keywords that companies have to follow. For the specific keywords, the companies are on their own. They have to generate their own lists. And in general, this is done by a first-line automated review of everything that users type in, and then questionable cases will get sent to humans for adjudication. And then finally, meat space, and I will leave this brief because I think Catherine's going to talk a lot about this, but basically both individuals and companies can be prosecuted for hosting or posting content that is deemed illegal or negative. That can include fines, business suspension, closures, police interrogation, jail time. And these don't happen to everybody every day, but they can happen to anyone. And your risk of being caught might change with your personal profile. If you're a member of a certain group or religion, you're maybe more likely to get in trouble, but no one in China is completely safe. There is also meta censorship, whereby people in China don't have access to outside apps created, or certain apps created elsewhere, so they get corralled onto China-built and therefore censored platforms. And Beijing works really, really hard to keep people from getting access to circumvention technologies. It devotes a significant chunk of its censorship resources to keeping people from finding them, downloading them. It also does probing to find proxy servers and block them. And so while it's not totally impossible to have a circumvention tool that works, it's a lot harder than simply going to the App Store and downloading it. And that's honestly enough to prevent most people from bothering. And the real world punishments I just mentioned before, they don't only just apply to posting content, they also apply to people who use or maintain VPNs. So you may be asking yourself, okay, but every country has rules about what's illegal. There's certain things that can't be on the internet. For example, in the US, CSAM, child sexual abuse material, is illegal. Commercial platforms have to prevent that from appearing on their sites. They're supposed to. The difference really is the number and types of things that are illegal on China's internet. So here's this, the screenshot of illegal and negative information. And you'll notice that some of these items are quite vague. And that allows the government a really wide latitude to declare something illegal when they want to. So just to sum up, the Locknet is a socio-technological system. It is not just a wall at the border. It's not just extra technology bolted onto the normal internet. It's fully integrated throughout the stack and in the physical world. And I didn't have time right now to get into how the way the Locknet leaks out into the global internet, but if there's interest in that, perhaps we can get to it, other questions. And with that, I will turn it back to everybody in the real world room.
Thank you so much. And that I was trying to figure out in the room video, but I think it has all just worked. Wonderful. Okay. So with that, then I get to introduce our second speaker. Katherine Wilhelm is the Executive Director of the U.S. Asia Law Institute at the New York University School of Law. And she also edits the Institute's online essay series, U.S. PLI Perspectives. She's an expert on China's legal system, public interest law organizations, and civil society. And she came to NYU after nearly 3 decades spent in Asia, after a long career in law and also a career in journalism, which I think is just such a fascinating background that you bring so with that, let me hand it over to Catherine.
Yeah.
Laura, you're not
speaking loud enough.
okay.
They can hear.
Okay, speak up, Laura. Got it.
If I stand there, would that be better?
No, just speak. There's microphones. You just have to speak loudly.
Loudly, project. Okay. Can do. So thank you so much for inviting me to this really interesting conversation. I really enjoyed the process of just organizing my thoughts to talk in a sort of holistic overview way about this how the internet is regulated in China. I want to first provide a bit of context for understanding internet censorship and surveillance and censorship. This system is a subset of a much larger and much older system of surveillance and control of speech that began in the offline world. And that system has become deeply embedded over the decades in China's law and society. So adding the internet surveillance and control has been an expansion, and it's a second floor on top of the first floor that already existed. The realm of things that cannot be said online is much broader than the realm of things that cannot be said offline. And in recent years, it's been growing quite a bit. So why is that? Two reasons. One is the very real risks that we are all aware come from internet, including internet speech, social media. For example, massive scams, influencers pushing harmful behavior on youth, youthful addiction. Of course, we just had 2 trials, jury verdicts in the United States and New Mexico and LA, holding Meta liable for harms suffered by youth through the platforms. So in other words, these are real risks, real harms that people in other countries also recognize. So the Chinese government is responding to that. But the second reason that they're expanding their internet surveillance and control is regime insecurity, which Jessica alluded to. It's the incessant fears of a non-elected ruling party that the population is secretly unhappy and makes some people rise up. So in the US, almost the only thing that the platforms try to censor is child pornography. But we can compare that with the guidelines for live streamers on China's leading live stream platform, Douyin. They have 7 pages of guidelines. Some of what they forbid is quite obvious. Content that endangers national security, for example, or state secrets, quickly gets less obvious and more open to interpretation. So disseminating false information, or who decides what's false? Misinterpreting history, that's a really tough one. Promoting unhealthy views on marriage and romance. Malicious sensationalism, flaunting wealth, showing off, your Mercedes. Promoting negative cultural trends, undermining social stability. So obviously, these are all open to a lot of interpretation, and this is not comprehensive because every day government officials are sending guidance to the major platform players about things that have emerged or relevant just for that day or that week in that place that they want the platforms to be sensitive to. It could be a local incident, something that has occurred. It could be an anniversary of a sensitive date. It could be something in the international news, like don't allow people to comment on the U.S.-Iran war, for example. There's a nonprofit website in the United States called the China Digital Times that publishes government censorship directions when they obtain them. And when you read these, you realize that any topic has the potential to become sensitive in the right circumstances, even the weather. If there's just been, for example, a cold freeze, or a mudslide, or flooding, a comment about the weather could be construed as criticism of how the government moves. Internet instructions may come from local authorities, provincial authorities, or from the very top, which is the Cyberspace Administration of China. But even when it comes from the top, it doesn't mean that the way the internet is being censored is going to be uniform across the country, because it depends on localities' capacities and also their understanding, their interpretation of the guidance. So the result is that content that's posted in different places at different times and also by different people may have very different results. It has the effect of a patchwork quilt of regulation rather than a seamless whole of regulation. Most Chinese that I know have been attuned since childhood to be careful when they speak. They've been told to be careful when they speak. But even so, they find it tricky to know when when a post is deleted or if your account is even closed, exactly why. One example, I have a former student from China at the law school who told me that she was a live streamer before she came to the law school. That was how she raised money for her tuition. Her account on Douyin was shut down after she posted a live stream of herself dancing on the street in a U.S. city, not New York. And she didn't know why her account was shut down. And in fact, she was actually blacklisted on Douyin. So she pleaded with Douyin to tell her why. And they said, well, when you were dancing, there was a building behind you that had a big mural on it. And there was a face in the mural of somebody who's crying. We don't know why they were crying, but it looked like it could be a political message of some kind. So that was that. The account was closed. She's blacklisted from Douyin forever. And there's no appeals process. There's no tribunal. I know of one single user who has successfully sued his ISP for closing his account. That happened in 2009. This was a researcher who reposted something on his account in Beijing about an algae outbreak on a lake in Jiangsu province, which is quite distant from Beijing. And the ISP said that the police in Jiangsu had told them to shut the account. And so the researcher sued in a Beijing court, which to everybody's surprise, including his, actually ruled in his favor. The argument was contract violation. And the court said the ISP should prove that the content was illegal. So he got his account back up, but the coda to that is that he's no longer posting online. He's opened and had closed so many accounts he's given up. His contact violation argument will not win in court anymore because first internet companies began inserting language in their terms of service, of course, to say that they could close your account even if the content was not illegal. It was up to them to decide. And then secondly, laws began to be passed that explicitly required the platforms and internet companies generally to remove harmful content according to directions from the government. So whether it's illegal or not, and this is an important distinction, most of the content that is removed or blocked is not illegal. It's not criminal, and it's not illegal. More and more laws have been issued that make internet companies responsible for policing not just content, but also a range of online activities: unfair competition, internet traffic manipulation, hacking, unaddressed vulnerabilities, unapproved transfers of data, abuse of personal information, and so on and so on. And the companies are required to take immediate action. It's not a question of if you're notified by the government, you need to take it down. They are required to monitor in real time and remove it at the risk of losing their own operating licenses. So you can imagine it highly motivated to do this. If Facebook or X removes content, it's because they're enforcing their own community rules. In China, if content is removed, it's out. The company is deputized by the government, and the police are just a step away. So let's talk a little bit about consequences. Having your account shut down or being blacklisted is the worst that's going to happen from the platform. But because the police are standing in the wings, as it were, it can get a lot worse. The number of public intellectuals who are writing on Chinese internet now about issues of public concern, whether it's education policy or salaries of public officials or economic policies, is really shrunk from what it was even 10 years ago or 20 years ago, which was the golden era in the early 80s. And that's because they've been warned by the police and because some people have been arrested and put in prison for periods of months or even several years purely for the content that they posted on the internet. In 2020, during the early weeks of the COVID virus, which emerged in the city of Wuhan, there were at least two ordinary Chinese who went to the city and began publishing content that they were filming from hospitals and from crematoria. They wanted to show the country what the extent of the outbreak was because there wasn't a lot of official information being released. And they were arrested and prosecuted for the crime of picking quarrels. This is a very vaguely defined crime. It was written for the offline world, but it's been applied in recent years to the online world, and they did receive prison terms. There are many other cases I could cite. I mentioned VPN use. I think Jessica also mentioned VPNs. They can be used in China, but it's illegal to use one that is not sold by a state telecommunications operator or licensed by the authorities. So when my last position in China, my company, we had to use VPN because everything is based on Google, and Google is blocked in China. But our VPN, which is from Cisco, had to be licensed by the authorities, and that's a very common scenario. So I know of a case, 2017, a Chinese student studying in the United States at the University of Washington went home for a family visit in China. She used her university VPN to get online to the course web page and submit the coursework. There's no right space, probably. She was unfortunately in Xinjiang, which is probably the place on earth which is most closely surveilled online in real time. Police detained her for 5 months in a re-education center and didn't allow her to go back to the United States, continue to school for 18 months after she was released. There are other cases. That's one of the most disturbing ones. Finally, because I think I'm in overtime, 2 developments I'd like to flag, or no? Okay. One is there's increased enforcement of real-time registration rights. There's a new law being drafted, the cybercrime law, which is really leading into this. And that allows authorities to identify who is behind any kind of online activity, whether it's content posting, financial transactions, buying something, purchasing, whatever. So that is happening now. And the other is there's growing efforts to enforce China's internet rules outside of China through extraterritoriality provisions that have been put in various relevant laws.
Katherine, thank you so much. Oh gosh, I have so many questions I want to ask. So much to break down. Okay, I will speak as loudly as I can. I would just like to start with a question to Jessica, though. You mentioned that, at least historically, this censorship system has been a one-way ratchet of increasing functionality, increasing effectiveness. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about where do you see this system going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, no, we're good. I actually was just doing some research today on censorship of LLMs, you know, these chatbots that people are talking with online. And it seems like there's a slight bit of a little bit more willingness on the part of the government to understand that, you know, these LLMs just make up new answers every time and they're not always going to be right. That said, they're still building out that system to censor chatbots. Again, every time a new development happens, they add on to the existing system. Just like Katherine said, you had this much older offline censorship system. When the internet came online, you build on top of that, and now they're building on top of it again for LLMs. So I think that, you know, as I mentioned before, well, maybe I didn't mention before, the system's never perfect, right? Things can always slip through. It just needs to be good enough for enough people, enough of the time. That's going to continue to be true. But I just think that there's no reason that we should expect it to not continue on the way that it's continuing. I'm watching in real time as new regulations are being bolted on for LLMs. And I think the real-time registration that Katherine brought up is really, really important, because so much of what they're trying to do, what Beijing is trying to do, isn't necessarily to get companies to do what they want, although they want to do that too. The best thing that can happen from the government's perspective is if people police their own speech, right? The most effective policeman is the one that lives in your own head. And real name registration has a real chilling effect on speech, because you know that the government can find out who you are very quickly. And you know, some of the arbitrariness and vagueness of the rules that Katherine talked about, that also pushes you towards self-censorship. If you're not sure what you're going to get in trouble for, you'll probably tone it down more than you might otherwise. And so I just think that in addition to always bolting on for new technologies, there's just this constant push to get people to do the government's work for them.
Thank you. That is so interesting. I think so. Catherine, there's so much of that is what is embedded in law, but I just want to ask you actually a slightly different question. One of the things you said when you were speaking is that, in many cases, the content being censored is not illegal. And I'd like you to unpack that a little bit, because also the thing you said after that is that the government will compel the platform to remove that content, and that people can be arrested as a result of that. Mm-hmm. And I know that there's actually some nuance in there, but just functionally speaking, if the government can compel people to take it down and then after that they can arrest you, how is that not functionally speaking illegal if all of those consequences can accrue? And I like I said, I understand that there's nuance, but if you could unpack that a little bit and help us understand what that even means.
Yeah. So we just have to make a distinction, just a simple distinction. So some large percentage, maybe 90%, maybe 95%, I don't know what it is, maybe it's 99% of the content that's posted is completely legal. It's just considered harmful. So the example I gave of making a comment on the weather, if you've just had major flooding and like mudslides, and maybe even some people have been killed because of a natural disaster, and somebody posts a comment like about how the government's handled all of that, that's considered harmful to social stability. So that's not, you could say, well, that's legal. It's questionable, right? If the police decide that your comment was widely seen, if they are instituting a kind of zero tolerance policy at that moment towards any kind of criticism, if it's a really bad incident, right? If we're talking something where dozens of people died, for example, and they're really concerned about that there is a lot of popular criticism, then they might decide to treat it as an illegal response, right? They could decide that the criticism of the government handling of the floods is captured by, for example, picking floods, because you're causing disorder in society, and they could prosecute you. Or they don't even have to prosecute you in a court of law. They could simply use what they call a public administrative punishment, where the police themselves can hold you in detention for up to 15 days and confine you, right? So, but they don't have to decide that it's illegal, because they could just say, well, this is just a comment about the weather, or it's within the norm of what people expect to be able to say about their government, and they could just let it go. Or they could call you into the police station and say, do you think that your comment was really what was a good thing to do at this point in time? Why don't you have more social consciousness? Why aren't you more responsible netizen? Aren't you a Communist Party member? Aren't you a teacher at the local university? Do you want to keep your job? And then you'll say, of course not, and you'll write a self-criticism, right? So the line as to what's legal and illegal is not really that clear, and to a large extent, it's in the eyes of the holder, meaning of the police and the authorities in that community at that point in time.
There's a couple. So that is, I think, thinking about the line of what is legal and illegal as not being a line, as being like a gray zone is. I think that's something that turns the head of, certainly turns my head a little bit, and I think it would turn the head of a lot of people who, grew up inside of like a liberal democracy that is a little bit more like rules based. But I think there's a couple of other things.
Can you certify that everything you've done in your tax return is completely?
What a great example of this. I think though. Well, I think there's two other things. I think one, we do have the sense of de facto and de jure, but we acknowledge that, right? Like there is a speed at which cops will pull you over, and it's different than the speed limit that's posted, but there is a speed, and obviously that speed can vary, but like we know that there's a speed because cops will set their radar guns to a speed where it will make a noise, right? Like there is actually a line at any given at any given point in time. But I think there's a couple other pieces of this inside what you said that I want to highlight, and one of them is the way that, frankly, inside China, law is not something that constrains government action. I feel like that's an assumption that's baked into what you described about the government can decide now we're going to, it doesn't have to be illegal, but it's important for we think it's important for social stability that all of this stuff come down and that we bring these people in and talk to them and get them to be, more upstanding citizens. And they don't have to be posting illegal content for me as the government to do that.
I guess I would rephrase that.
Please.
This is where lawyers get worried about language, right?
Yeah.
That it's not that, so if the police decide to take action, it's because they've made a determination, or somebody perhaps above them has made a determination that in the circumstances, as we would say, considering all the facts and circumstances of the case, this comment on this day is a threat to social stability, to order, harmony, and therefore it is illegal. Right? That's what they would say.
That it's more, and I think that's a great clarification, that it's what is illegal is contextual.
It's very contextual, which is true of every system as well. It's just much more contextual and much harder to determine and to ascertain, which is to go back to what I said at the outset. This is why people grow up with a strong sense of being careful about what they say. The average Chinese citizen does not just post whatever comes into their head. They're careful, usually. I mean, the younger you are, maybe, the more optimistic or careless you are. But you learn caution because every day in school, your teachers are telling you, your parents are telling you. This is an online and offline habit that is deeply ingrained throughout society.
And if you're not cautious, you will interact with you will interact not just with your parents and teachers, you will interact with the legal system if you're not cautious.
Yeah. Or your employer might say, I don't like what you do. I mean, there's all kinds of the range of consequences.
Okay, I have been exercising the moderator's prerogative extensively, but y'all can ask questions too. Yael.
I'd love to hear a bit more from Jessica. You touched on the leakage effect. So we're sitting in the United States. We think a lot about also what are the guardrails, potential guardrails, implications, all of that here in the US. I'd love to hear a little more about what you were hinting at there with sort of the leakage beyond Chinese borders.
Yes, I'm glad my hint worked. Okay, I think the biggest and most immediate one is that if you are using an app in the US there's only one version of. That is to say, the app functions both legally inside China and outside of China. That app is going to be censored. It can't function legally inside China unless it's censored. So Red Note, I think, is a good example of this. I don't know if anybody, and I can't see anybody, so I'm just assuming that you're not nodding along. There was a big to-do in early 2025 when when the US government was going to ban TikTok, and a bunch of people from the US joined Red Note in protest. Red Note was just designed for Chinese audiences, so it is censored. The version you get abroad is censored. And it took people a little while, the foreign users, to figure out that they couldn't just say whatever they wanted all the time. And in fact, there was like lots of Chinese users who were trying to be really helpful, like kind of give them hints about what not to say. So I think that's a big one. And it's not just things like Red Note. Laura's favorite example is this game Marvel Rivals, which I'm not a big gamer, so I've never played it, but that is censored. The chat in that game is censored. If you use DeepSeek abroad, and we can get into like the differences based on where you run it or whatever, it is going to be censored to some degree. Bing's auto suggestion for searches is censored, so or it can be. So these things just bleed over. Other ways, probably less common than that you're probably not going to run into your day-to-day life, but still happen. Just the vagaries of internet routing mean that if a packet goes through China and it says something it's not supposed to say, it'll get dropped, even though the person sending it was not in China, the person receiving it was not in China. That can just happen. DNS poisoning leaks out into the world. So when China has falsified DNS addresses, so people in China cannot resolve to those addresses, those false addresses do sometimes make their way out into the world. And that means other people elsewhere in the world trying to go to websites that they should be able to access also cannot get there. And then finally, something that Laura and I are hoping to look more into the future is this internet technical standard, and I know that's so boring, IPv6 plus. This is a standard that actually does like offer a lot better efficiency for carrying internet traffic from place to place, but it also offers a lot of opportunities for censorship and surveillance. And that technical standard, that hardware is being deployed in countries, not just in China. So yeah, there's a lot of ways that this system can impact you.
I have a follow-up clarification, just to make sure I understood. So in your example, like the Marvel one that is Laura's favorite example, does that also mean, I want to make sure I understand it. It's not just apps that are made in China but maybe used abroad, but what about an app that's like made in the US but used in China? Like it's like your example, is that an American app? Is that the Marvel?
So the development team for Marvel Rivals is Chinese. But if you think about it, if you're, and this comes up most commonly with live games that offer, live games. If a gaming app, the game is going to be offered inside China and anywhere else, it is going to have to follow the laws of every jurisdiction in which it is offered. And if you are going to now the way that some gaming companies have supported this is they have some servers in China and then they have some servers in other places. And like having regional servers is a common thing in the gaming space, but you just don't let players from those two areas play together. As soon as you're going to let people play together, then they're going to communicate. And that means that everybody needs to be subject to the laws that apply in any of the jurisdictions. So if you are playing a game or you're interacting on a service and there are other people who are inside mainland China who are interacting with that service not through some kind of workaround, then you are being subject to not just the laws of the jurisdiction you're in, but also to the laws of China.
And I'll just say, like, that's why a lot of companies develop two different versions of an app, right? That's why we have TikTok and Douyin. Like, TikTok's not available in China; it's a separate app. And a number of non-Chinese companies have done this, where they offer a separate version of their app inside China. But anytime you have one app that's going to be global, you're going to end up at the lowest common denominator of freedom of expression.
And there's a lot of technical and just practical product reasons why you would want to have one app. Like for games in particular, for matchmaking. The more users you have, the easier the matchmaking problem becomes. There's other reasons that cut against it, but I think it's always going to be a push and pull. And there's a lot of reasons that companies would like to offer one global app.
Can I add something on that? So there's a couple of other ways that China's censorship or its controls could bleed over borders. I mentioned at the end, probably you could catch it, that more and more Chinese laws have extraterritorial clauses being put in them. And what that means is they explicitly say that whatever is, the illegal action that law is directed against, even if the actions, even if the behavior takes place in foreign countries, it can constitute a crime in China, it can be prosecuted and punishable in China. They may add some provisions and they say, if, for example, the actions are taken and it's directed action, okay, or if it has effects in China, they may say. So kind of, specified kind of jurisdiction, or, they otherwise target it or make it narrow, but they often don't. And this is a deliberate effort that the government has been doing in recent years across the board with laws, is to enforce their own laws outside of China, and that includes a lot of the things that I was talking about. So if you create a surveillance circumvention tool outside China for sale in China and use in China, you could be prosecuted on your holiday trip down the Yangtze River. If you are a market researcher based outside China and you're purchasing Chinese data and you're transferring it outside to your server in the United States and do not have government or authorization to do that.
Other questions? Well, I have so many. I'm very happy to keep asking those. Jessica, to turn back to you for a second. I think something that I always get tangled up in my thinking on about this is so many of the individual systems that you were talking about, they absolutely exist outside China. And I know, something like we've talked, like the classic one is everyone knows about content moderation. Everyone sort of feels censored by like TikTok or Instagram or whatever. But actually many of the other mechanisms do as well. Companies will, the entire debate around net neutrality is in effect a topic about, what is the most favored traffic. And I guess I'm curious, when we think about in a positive way, how do we want the internet to be governed? What do you think are the lessons in, that we outside of China can take from some of the ways we've seen, in effect, the flow of information be slowed here? I mean, like, obviously, like there, I'm a little bit goosing the egg here for let's talk about network neutrality, but there's probably other things as well.
Well, I mean, actually, I'm curious what you want to say here, so I'll turn it back to you when I'm done, because I don't know that I have a great answer to this question. I mean, so much of what.
Well, then let me reframe very slightly. You mentioned some of the new technical protocols that China is advancing that have many benefits that like are some real technical advantages in identity plus. What are the where should we be cautious when we look forward to a future that we're like we do need we do need more efficient standards.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so yes, you are getting at like the central tension, or one of the central tensions of the internet. And I think, as you said, like it's going to become more and more central as time goes by, because there is absolutely a very real trade-off between efficiency of speed and between like privacy. And it is very, very tempting, both at like a macro level and at a micro, like, why won't this website load level, to just be like, great, I don't care, just please give me the thing faster. And that is really great until it stops being really great. And I think, back to your original question, I mean, the first thing I thought of when you're like, these things happen everywhere, why is it so different in China, or some version of that? I mean, the answer really is like, because, Google doesn't have its own police, right? Google has problems. I have all sorts of problems with privacy in the US, but Google does not have police. And so as we're thinking more and more going into the future about this trade-off between, efficiency and privacy, we really have to think about like, who is the network controller? Who has access to this? And do they have police? If you are embedding, for example, IPv6 plus standards into your national network, and you have given the government access to be able to look at what's in those packets, that government probably has police. That government probably can take you to jail. So I just think that like, it's a really hard argument because it's not good for getting your videos really fast, but it is the conversation that we need to have.
So in effect, if I understand what you're saying, the sort of the poison here is the fact that it's the fact that the government, in the case of China, both controls the network itself, and through that control has extensive surveillance powers, and that it, on the other end, also has a monopoly on the use of force. And it's kind of that, like, all of those powers together are the thing that becomes dangerous.
Yes. Yes. And, look, do I think that Google has too much information about all of us and has too much power? Yes. Like, I'm not defending the status quo in the US either, but it is exactly what you said. It's both it's all of that surveillance, the possibility to stop communications, and the monopoly on the use of force all in one entity that's where the real danger is.
Does anyone else have a question? Otherwise, I'm going to kind of turn it back to Katherine. To close this out. So Katherine, I think one of the things that I've been so glad to have you here today and have you talk through all this stuff with us is I think for me, learning more about China's legal system and the ways that they implement these very effective controls has been so illuminating, because the flip side of what Jessica just said is that the Chinese government is incredibly effective at what it does because it has both a tremendous amount of information, has control over the physical infrastructure of its own internet, and it, and again, like, it's the government, it has a monopoly on the use of force. And I mean, I don't want to, like, I'm not here to make to be devil's advocate, but I guess I do wonder if you could talk a little bit about, I guess, is this all working? Like, how effective should we be thinking about this as a broader societal project, as a project that China puts into place through its legal system and through a set of rules? And when I say effective, I mean, they obviously view information control as integral to their system, and I think they're probably correct. And I guess, is this something that we should be thinking about this as, this is a level of information control that has certainly waxed, but it is a system that has always waxed and waned, and so we should, maybe things will maybe now we should be expecting things to loosen and liberalize? Or do you think, as Jessica put it, that this is like just a one-way ratchet that will only ever become tighter as part of, because the Chinese government sees this as part of how they maintain power and maintain an effective state, right? To not just be cynical about it.
Well, there's a couple of ways of assessing the Chinese system if you want to do a report card. How successful or how good is what they're doing. You can be completely critical of the entire system and say that it is this vast system that weighs on individual and personal expression of speech and so on, that it suppresses creativity, it suppresses information from spreading that's necessary, that's important, right? So really useful information that should be disseminated for society does not get disseminated, etc., because it's filtered out. You could see it entirely in a negative light like that, or you could say that actually there are both, like most things in this world, good and bad, right, in what they've achieved. So the Chinese system shows us that a lot of our easy beliefs about how it's just not possible to censor things on the internet, it's not possible to protect our children from the harms of social media, it's not possible to protect ourselves from the invasion of corporations that want all our data, it's not possible to keep my credit card number from being hacked yet again online when I buy it some other site. But all of these things are absolutely possible to achieve. Well, China's achieved that. Okay? So it's possible, it's doable, it's just that somebody has to pay the price. And in China, the price is the individual user is being silenced. In the United States, it's the companies that are doing most of the stealing of information and most of the abuse and the invasion and so on. And they just reap the profits, right? It's in each society, it's a balancing of who wins and who loses, who comes out on top, and whose interests are being prioritized. In China, the laws protect users' privacy from abuse by corporations. It's not 100% successful, but it's a heck of a lot better than it is here. Okay, but we have no restrictions on privacy, right? So they will protect you against abuses by the companies. They don't protect you against abuses by the government. Here are the laws and constitution about protecting us from overreach by the government. There's nothing to protect us from overreach by the companies. So in each system, the question is, who is being privileged, who is being ignored, whose interests come out. In the Chinese system, under a one-party state, that, as I said, is always, the party is always, it's like a teenager, it's insecure all the time. Right? There's not an election in which they get that reaffirmation that people really like us. So they're constantly concerned about something that will destabilize the rule. And they believe that control enables the whole society to move forward. The greatest good for the greatest number. If a few people can't get their accounts, have their accounts shut down, that's just small change because the whole society is moving forward. Children are protected from older laws. We have made a different set of choices. And I think what's interesting about learning about what China's doing is to see the choices that they have made, the way they've balanced and checked the different priorities of powers, and to weigh that against the choices we have made, and then ask ourselves, are there some other options in between these two extremes?
Wow, thank you so much for what is, I think, a wonderful closing thought. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Please join me in thanking our guests, Jessica and